OECD covers full range of activities and the use of resources that create value and benefits to the human beings in the course of exploring, researching, understanding, managing, and utilizing space. It covers various segments like satellite communication, positioning and navigation and timing, Earth observation, different applications, entire value chain of the space industry, ground segment, launch vehicles, and defense strategic domain. India's own space program began with and continues to be guided by the vision of Dr. Vikram Sarabhai, who said, "We must be second to none in the application of advanced technologies to the real problems of the men and society." What is the forecast for the space economy in 2047? The global trend is that it is going into what is called the increased private participation. The economy is going to be about 1.5 trillion, and to frequent travel to space. The emerging trends in space are mining, rare materials, mineral extraction, hospitality, farming, less supply from the earth, manufacturing, made in space products, and so on. Indian space economy projection 2047 is that about 1.8% of the GDP, which will be in the form of $0.7 trillion. More focus on the second order impact, regional alliance leadership, and space reaching all. If you look at the global picture of the space economy, we have today in 2020, it's about 447 billion and likely to reach about $1,500 billion in 2047. Indian contribution to the GDP is close to 2%, likely to be 10% by 2025, and in 2047 we hope to be around 2047. So the global space economy, there are 8,261 satellites orbiting the Earth as on January 22, out of which only 4,850 satellites are active. There are 90 countries that are operating in space, but only 8 countries have orbital launch capability, namely the US, China, Russia, ESA, India, Iran, Israel, and Japan. There are 14 companies that conduct regular launches and are another 10 planning to launch soon. The activities that are being shared today are communication, Earth observation, technology development, navigation and positioning, and Earth sciences. As I mentioned to you, about 10 countries of origin, India is at the 6th place in terms of the number of satellites what we have. What is the kind of investment emerging in the space segment? In 2021, countries around the globe invested about 92 billion in their space programs, of which 83% came from just 5 countries, namely USA, about $54.6 billion, then China, 10.3, Japan, 4.2, France, 3.9, Russia, about 3.6. In the same year, we have startup space ventures attracted over 15 billion, breaking the 7.7 billion record set in 2020. In addition, 2021 was a record-setting year for the number of startup space deals, 241, up by about 48% from 2020 figure. Recipients were about 212, which is up by 46%, and average deal size was $64 million. You can see the numbers that have gone up right hand side, which is indicated here. I just want to give you a glimpse of Indian space program, which is application driven, self-reliant, focus on national development. We have 75 launch vehicle missions using various kinds of launch vehicles, 109 satellites realized, 52 satellites in orbits, catering to the national requirements, launched about 390 satellites from 13 countries. This figure is 2019. Obviously, we have gone much beyond that over the years. ISRO's capabilities are there across all sectors, particularly the space transportation, with operational vehicles like PSLV, GSLV, LVM-3, and upcoming launch vehicles like SSLV, that is a small satellite launch vehicle, reusable launch vehicles, and LVM-3 upgrade. In the space infrastructure, we have about 20 Earth observation satellites, 24 communication satellites, plus 8 navigation satellites, 20 interplanetary satellites in orbit now. And our ground segment is also pretty strong in terms of Earth gateways for all communication satellites and tracking and telemetry stations at MCF Hassan, ISTRAC, and MRTR. Our space application segment is covering the satellite meteorology and disaster management, broadcast services and communication networks, monitoring of land, farms, forests, oceans, lakes, pipelines, and satellites-assisted navigation with Gagan and Navik. Important missions which have been completed and are also in the offing are Launch Vehicle Mark III, an international program working called NISA 2024 with NASA and ISRO for launching a synthetic aperture radar, will be a dual-band radar of ISRO for launching a synthetic aperture radar, will be a dual-band radar observation offering large swath with high-resolution data. The major program in which the focus is on the human space exploration, which is a national endeavor, which is developing national capability for sustaining human presence in the space. It is called Gaganyaan, which will be between 24 and 25. 2 unmanned flights with 1 manned flights has been planned. It's a national collaboration with different institutions like ISRO, academia, CSIR labs, industry, Indian Air Force, and so on. And even international agencies like CNES France, Galvacom Russia, and Amazon Web Services. Basically, we are trying to develop large number of technologies as part of this, which are listed here, like intravehicular and extravehicular flight suit, docking mechanisms, space biology, microgravity payload experiments, and so on. Our vision is basically to reach future lunar missions, interplanetary missions, and asteroids and exoplanets, etc. Space applications, our focus is on communication, infrastructure, data connectivity, broadcasting, and education. Monitor natural resources, meteorological observations, discern environment. Of course, we cover weather, disasters, cartography, agriculture, ocean, PNT, strategic services, assured navigation signals, location-based services, and geospatial services. So this is a whole lot of applications which have been developed over a period of time. I just want to start this slide with one important statement. While we use space for defense, but India certainly does not believe in space warfare. Including space for defense is basically to include various uses of space capabilities for military operations and missile defense, which is early warning, accounts for the main functions of interest for military intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance, satellite communication, positioning, navigation and timing, and space surveillance. The intent is basically to enhance the military operations using space assets. What is the enabling requirement? Integrate space across defense domains, build resilience in space systems and services, enhance non-kinetic capability of the space systems. There's another term called defense of space. Having launched so many space assets for aiding the military, obviously there's a threat to those assets. So defense of space becomes very important, which accounts for the prevention of potential threats to space assets like kinetic, directed energy, jamming, spoofing, cyber, and existing countermeasures, which includes defense of space-based, ground-based, down and uplink segments when an asset is in operation. The strategic intent in this is to develop defensive capabilities for space warfare. Mind my word, develop defensive capabilities for space warfare. Enabling requirement is develop on small satellite capabilities, develop advanced terrestrial sensor for satellites, and develop defensive capabilities against ASAT and RPOs. I just want to now talk about where does the space industry is evolving. We know the space 1.0 was focusing on astronomy, where early studies were on astronomy and astrology. Space 2.0 focused on race to space, spacefaring nations engaging in a space race leading to Apollo moon landing in 1969. Space 3.0 was global cooperation with the conception of the International Space Station in 1998 and cooperation and exploitation of the, basically it was restricted among the key nations, it was not all over. Now there's a shift in the paradigm completely with motivational change, actors are changing, contents are changing, roles are changing, and technologies are also changing. Shift from governments of a few spacefaring nations to involvement of a number of diverse space actors around the world. We are somewhere here today. And we have the space 4.0, which is the new space which is emerging, which intends to commercialize participation of the private sector through innovation. Emergence of private companies, academic industry, citizens, digitalization, and more inclusive global interaction. That is the space 4.0 which is emerging. New space ecosystem in India also has been transformed. What used to be once upon a time the government funded and government led space system in which government used to fund with prime vendors and subcontractors has become a government and private agencies as the stakeholders in the space ecosystem, where you have a consortium handshake between startups, private firms, investors, consumers, entrepreneurs, and global players. The crux of the policy today is ease of doing business, utilization of the space facilities, single window, ensure safety and security, and dissemination of satellite-based remote sensing data. The forecast is, as I mentioned to you, we are somewhere around 2%. We'll go to 10% of contribution in GDP. We are about $7 billion. We will be about $50 billion by 2023-25. Basically, we have three wings today. ISRO, which is the Space Research, Technology Development and Enabling Entity. We have New Space India Limited, which is commercial exploitation of the space technology, and In Space, which is promoting and regulating and hand-holding the NGPS. So this is the kind of framework which we have created for the meeting the new space requirement. The focus during this period is going to be on SATCOM. You can see that the broadcast media has come down by 28%, but there's a significant increase of air and sea, about 380%, defense about 149%, government about 247%, enterprises about 146%. Basically, broadcasting and streaming users are reducing, but connectivity, in-flight, maritime, security, broadband are increasing. ISRO's role is basically designing multi-orbit constellations, LEO, MEO, and GEO, developing advanced flexible payloads, indigenization of critical components, fostering private comsat builders in India. Small geosat through private industries like niche markets, specific regions, and government and military, bringing in new space services applications. We have already Airtel, Nalco, Telsat, Geo, all of them part of the system today. Next focus is the Earth observation. What used to be once upon a time the single satellite approach is being replaced by the constellations, and the constellations will have a what we call as a government funded and private realized EO constellations, which will be agile and flexible, interoperable and redundant, open data policy. It will have basically funding by government agencies. It could be private satellite industries pitching in with the satellites, or private and public launch vehicles launching the system. Large number of agencies are already operational. Their names are indicated here. Basically, what we are talking of a government EO constellation, private EO constellation, and private launchers. You can see internationally also today, Landsat has the economic benefit of the about 2.1 billion annually in terms of data. Similarly, Copernicus about 8.2 billion euros investment and estimate economic value of about 16 to 2 billion. So the main focus is going to be large data availability for startups, free data to space application industry. Now we have NSIL, which is focusing today on bringing industry in the big way. HAL and Larsen and Toubro to manufacture 5 numbers of PSLV, Excel end-to-end. We have launched 53 international customer satellites on board PSLV, secured 5 dedicated PSLV contracts, secured GSLV Mark III, and launched services like PSLV, GSLV Mark III, launching number of satellites, launching small satellites, and so on. So this is the kind of a scenario which is emerging today. The number of non-government entities registered with InSpace is close to 500, and InSpace has also received over 200 applications from about 175 of these entities through the portal. And registrations have been obtained from academia, government, industry, and so on for different kind of applications like satellite, launch vehicles, ground segment, and so on. The India's emerging private sector is focusing now on space transportation, and Skyroot Aerospace, which has done the first suborbital flight composite structure, Agnikul Cosmos, which has done semi-cryo engine test, NOx and methane, Bellatrix Aerospace, which has done first demo thruster in-orbit servicing and space tech, Space Infrastructure, Pixel India, third demo satellite, high spectral imagery, demo nano satellites by the CubeSat and so on, Dhruva Space. Digantra is doing the space debris collection system. Similarly, multiple agencies are working on space applications like SatSure and Vasundhara and Digantra. The impact of this is in that today, what used to be once upon a time only 7 startups in 2016, we have reached a figure of 47, and total cumulative figure is about 101. Investors' confidence has gone up from something like $60 million to as high as $80.5 million. In different segments, more than 150 applications have been received in space for working, and many agencies are up with their proposals. New space era, the global trends are next generation satellite systems, manufacturing in space, small satellite constellations, space-based solutions, IoT, automation and governance, space tourism, space traffic management, and so on. The roadmap, what we consider, there is a slide missing. Yeah, the roadmap we are looking at is the space-based surveillance, which is our 03. Space-based will continue. Global secure PNT communication and EO and space-based over a period from 2025 to 2047. Spacecraft innovation and exploration, flexible COMSAT, full EPS satellites to quantum optical COMSATs, Indian Space Station-based R&D, economic activity, interplanetary networks. Continuing human space flight from Gaganyaan continuation, manned mission to moon, technologies for planetary habitation. Launch cost reduction is our main aim, where reusable heavy launchers would be developed, fully reusable two-stage to-orbit vehicle, and rapid public space transport and logistics. Business of space travel will be another priority area where private space parks, space tourism, global space data solutions, global space manufacturing hub, and space exploration and space mining will be on the cards. India must take a leadership in the formation of an international alliance on space and involving not only the spacefaring nations but also the space aspiring nations. This alliance should develop a protocol for utilizing benefits of the space for mankind by focusing on the following areas: space asset surveillance, satellite network for economic growth, satellite for securing borders, space tourism, space debris mitigation, space mining, space energy, space laws. New space activities, a catch-all term for endeavors including orbital tourism, orbital manufacturing, and mini satellite providing specialized services. The space sector, with a market capitalization of $400 billion, could grow to as much as $1 trillion by 2040 as private investment source. There is a video. Can somebody play that, please? Can you play that? Yeah. Thank you.
Eight, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Plus 5 seconds.
T3 tracking.
T1 tracking.
Off normal.
T2 tracking.
T4 tracking. Stage performance normal.
So steady. So steady.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much once again, Dr. Saraswat, for your enlightening thoughts. And next, ladies and gentlemen, we are very fortunate to have with us Mr. Jayant Patil, the chairman of Indian Space Association, ISPA, and he's going to enlighten us about the emerging Indian space industry ecosystem in the new space era. With his expertise and in-depth understanding, Mr. Patil will shed light on the promising developments and opportunities in the Indian space sector. Let's welcome him with a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. There he is, Mr. Jayant Patil.
It's my proud privilege to be present in this hall and speak to all the delegates of G20. I can only say one thing, that ancient India knew that there's something called space and there's space objects. In Sanskrit, the world was defined as Jagat. Jagat is a word which defines that something that constantly moves, anything that has speed. And the ancient India 5 to 10,000 years back knew that the world continuously moves and evolves. So from those days of what used to happen in the space, if we start looking at, and pardon me for some repetition with Dr. Saraswat, but what we are seeing is the space today has virtually encompassed us across every possible discipline of our lives. Communication, we cannot think. Think of the broadband that's available in the world and going to be available this year in India. Navigation and GPS in complex cities, take my word, Bangalore you cannot travel without a Google. You will just not reach, or you just can't predict the kind of time you will take. Earth observation has become important both for military as well as for varieties of reasons, including architecture, disaster, urban planning, and varieties of kind of things. We have scenarios of weather forecasting. We had our cities, and as the climate change is happening, our cities are receiving unprecedented quantum of rain or droughts of some part of the nation. And that's essentially where the weather forecasting becomes extremely important. Scientific research, R&D, primarily what ISRO focused on, and of course the space ecosystem in terms of right from manufacturing to launch services to space tourism, whatever we can think of. Today the space provides that, and of course the defense aspect of reconnaissance, surveillance, observation, military intelligence, and ability to designate in case required. So obviously, this is one sector which we all see that it's a dual use. Any significant technology obviously can be used for peaceful as well as for the other purposes. And that's essentially what space is, one of those very peculiar, extreme high tech, but can be used for dual purposes. The high and sustained investment is something it is required for space because you have single shot devices, but 100% reliability is demanded. Long gestation period, sustained R&D, decades is what it takes to prove any given system. And then, of course, once you have a system, you can keep on replicating. Return on investments are low. Fundamentally, it's the game that governments essentially play and then the industry latches on. Dependence on external infrastructure for monitoring, testing, and validation for every country that decides to enter into this space. There's a lot of dependence in terms of testing and qualification. India today, having evolved over precisely about 6 decades of our space experience, we are at somewhere at this stage. Today, this is something which India can offer to every partner. Formal space research, if we start looking at India, we date back to 1920. In 1920, Indian scientist Dr. Mitra conducted some sounding experiments, the sounding of the ionosphere, and formally in 1940, it was two great scientists, two sons of this soil, who created one, the Physical Research Laboratory, which became the, in a way, Vikram Sarabhai's lab, that became, in a way, ISRO much, much later. Dr. Bhabha, who created the TIFR, which essentially created the nuclear sector for the country. In 1950, we see that Department of Atomic Energy was founded and whole lot of research started getting concentrated, leading to the formation of Indian National Committee for Space Research, which took the name, a short name of ISRO in 1969. I must say, anything that till date has happened in this country has happened because it's ISRO's initiatives which actually have become real. I am also someone who's privy that out of this journey of 51 years, nearly this 51 years, my company, the one I belong, has been partnered to ISRO. Now, the reason I am talking specifically about this is ISRO knew that without industry, you can't do things. So it was not that the lab did everything, it's also the laboratory, the scientific community, and the industry who work together to make sure this country today has an ecosystem of space industries, which is typically about 600 industries, small, medium, large, and of course the new generation setups which we keep hearing about day in and day out. So our space related foray, if I have to start counting right from 60s to the 2000s, some of the pictures obviously are a repetition, but from that 1963 famous image of the sounding rocket launches to the 1975 our own first satellite to 1978 our first SLV launch from India, or from, for that matter, the PSLV launch after the development completion in 1990, and then, of course, the interplanetary missions. India has been one country which has been able to manage interplanetary missions at probably unthinkably low kind of costs. And these are extreme, I would say, use of intelligent ability to analyze, very low cost that went into missions. And on the lighter side, our Prime Minister actually had spoken that the distance to Mars and back, if you pay on a rickshaw, the tuk-tuk that a lot of my foreign friends call in India, you will pay more than what ISRO paid for that mission to happen. So in terms of ability to innovate and do something wonderful and carry the whole industry together has been our past. And that's where one sees that Indian space has done amazing levels of achievements in the times that have been in the past. Obviously, when we are starting to talk about it, the partnership of industry, it's right from launch vehicles to space systems to communication satellites to various infrastructures. Mind you, bulk of these 60 years, India remained under sanctions from the Western nations. And during that era, it's the scientific community and the industry collaboration that kept our stoves alive. We kept on making progresses, we kept on achieving things which otherwise were not possible for most nations. But that's essentially what the Indian mind actually created together. So some amazing test facilities that came up ahead of time in this very country, and that's where we have been preparing to carry this mission forward in terms of absolute state-of-the-art cutting-edge facilities. Call it the materials for building the space machinery. Most of the materials India builds by itself. It's not that India remained dependent primarily on account of those sanctions, which made this country learn that you can't be dependent on anybody if you want to truly become what our Prime Minister calls the Atmanirbhar. Obviously, we have reached certain levels of readiness in terms of what all is required to be, ability to grow into space. We are almost at those stages of a launch pad, which is all well set. Right from launch services to satellite manufacturing to ground system to spacecrafts to space science exploration. I'm just going to be skipping on. You can see the readiness levels of this country, that industrialization is the only stage we probably fell short to make it into very, very large number. And from typically 4 to 5 launches a year, I see a year going ahead, which is essentially going to be talking of more than 20 launches a year, 25 launches a year. And they're going to be both from the NCL, from ISRO, as well as from the private sector. This is the backdrop to what happened in 2020. Prime Minister decided that this sector now needs to grow in terms of space commerce. And the space commerce, if it had to grow, it needs to be created in the form of some structural difference to the past. This structural difference has been created in the formation of what we know as in-space to handhold and regulate the private industry. Simultaneously was formed an organization called ISPA. As soon as the announcement to open the sector happened, Prime Minister had a meeting with some of the industry people and suggested you create a society which represents only specifically the space industry, and this society then can collaborate, talk to government, and then of course whatever policy requirements are there or changes in our policies are required, they can actually be created. That's where exactly we see from 22 onwards, the policy has just now come now in May 2023. The telecommunication bill came. The overall policies, various policies governing the sector are in place today. And of course, we heard from Dr. Goenka that the legal backing to these policies is right now under consideration of the government. Having done this, we now see a new age industry suddenly getting into space manufacturing. We are talking of satellite manufacturing. We are talking of startups who are getting into launch, who are getting into satellite services, ground segments, various new technologies. There's an enormous amount of focus today being put up jointly between the Department of Space, ISRO, and of course the industry to be able to take this nation forward. And each and every of those segments that we see on the slide, there's work, a sizable amount of work today is happening within the country, which is going to, in a way, metamorphosize what India's contribution to the space commerce is going to be. That is the backbone to what Dr. Saraswat talked about, 50% of the world's commerce, if India can attain. We have leadership in, because of our IT and IT-enabled services, which is the 60%, 50 to 60% of the market actually lies there, if not more. Now, that is the segment which essentially is going to be making all the difference for us because we lead the world in terms of the knowledge-driven economies. What specific initiatives which today are in place is the 5 satellite launch vehicles, the PSLVs, which are going to be created by ISRO and Hindustan Aeronautics together. The first launch is to be expected in less than typically 9 months from now. Digandhara obviously has very successfully launched first commercial space-based weather monitoring system. This is something where the industry didn't exist. Typically 2 years back, you see that kind of a leapfrogging with which you see the new startups adequately getting funded, investments coming in, and innovation on the scene, physically to be seen. There are 72 satellites for OneWeb which have been launched using the ESLV's launch missions. Skyroot has actually done its own first launch. Second launch is now scheduled. Pixel, Anand satellite, Anand is Joy. The satellite was named Anand and has been successfully launched on the recent P-54 mission. Dhruva has launched 2 nano-satellites on the last mission. We keep talking about the space kids. It was the payload on the SSLV, the first developmental SSLV. Galaxy Eye is among the 30 most promising space startups of 2022 and 11th edition of the Tech 30 report by TechSparks. Bellatrix, Chairman ISRO inaugurated the rapid prototyping facility. UGES, Indian Oil Corporation and huge US corporation have collaborated for managing network services. So now space networking is becoming real. UGES Communication again with ISRO launched its first high throughput satellite broadband service. MapMy India has unveiled Maples. That's an Indian option to Google, and trust me, far, far more accurate, can predict the chaotic traffics far better. Bharat Electronics, an order worth 250 crore from MOD for some classified work. Astrom gets a grant from DOT for next generation 5G wireless gear. Won 2 major awards this year. Centum has inked an MOU with Indra in terms of trying to do the space radar systems manufacture. Kepler has become the primary ground source station partner for the INS series of satellites, the 2B series of INSATs. Nelco has completed the LEO demonstrations and of course applied for the licenses. Adding Technologies has got the S-band transponder subsystem satellite involving fabrication, wing assembly. It's a kind of a full-fledged satellite building subcontract which are going to be built in India. Alpha has received, ISRO has received a crew module fairing from Alpha, and bulk of the hardware, lots of industries today are doing, which is going to be delivered to ISRO soon. Agnikul has done multiple things. Obviously, the first rocket factory in India, very sizable 3D printed kind of rocket technology. Test fired its second semi-cryo engine, and of course, Chairman has inaugurated India's first private launch pad, which was developed by the Agnikul Cosmos. Adista has obviously put a satellite on 10th of June this year, and of course, space exploration hardware. There's a Blue Origin and La Centobra discussion which is on cards, awaiting formal steps on that direction. So when we start looking at building of tomorrow, it's not just the upstream which starts with either a satellite or a launch system, but it will go far, far deeper into downstream applications where India was precisely 3 years back. We were across industry, hardware producers, we didn't know what was system integration. Satellite, we were able to produce subsystems. We were doing critical test facilities and SATCOM. From there, we are leapfrogging in 30. I'm only talking of the top end because the lower end is the mass of what India does in the form of our IT and IT-enabled services. And that is what we believe is going to leverage our commerce aspect to be reaching to every human on this earth, not just limiting to what we'll do within the country. Thank you so much. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Mr. Jayant Patil, for that exposition of the industry's growth. I also want to thank you specifically for your journey along with ISRO and your former company, LNG, who has been the partner in building many of our rockets and systems for ground systems, for which you showcase some of them. In fact, what we are looking today is the greater engagement of not only the startups, but also the big industry houses in India who have real potential to get into space and build systems on their own and end-to-end capability, which is being showcased by L&T by their new initiatives. So thank you so much for that. And ESPA for the platform that you are bringing in all industries on board. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Look forward.
Thank you very much once again, sir, for energizing this esteemed gathering with your invaluable thoughts. And ladies and gentlemen, next we are extremely glad to have a video message from Mr. Clayton Mori, the president of the International Astronautical Federation, IAF, who's going to share his invaluable knowledge on the role and significance of IAF in the new space era. Let's take a look at that video message now.
Hi, I'm Clay Mori, president of the International Astronautical Federation. It's my pleasure to address you today. I want to thank Chairman Salmanath for hosting the Space Economy Leaders Meeting under the G20 Presidency of India. I regret that I'm not able to join you in person, but I wish you a week of successful meetings. Recently, India's Prime Minister Modi visited Washington, D.C. And during that visit, India announced that it had joined 27 countries in signing NASA's Artemis Accords for lunar exploration. Congratulations. About 1 month ago, I had the opportunity to visit ISRO headquarters in India and learn about the amazing achievements that the Indian Space Research Organization has achieved over the last several years. Over 90 launches of 122 spacecraft. Congratulations on this amazing achievement, and we look forward to many more successful missions with India's family of launch systems, GSLV, PSLV, and SSLV, as well as the amazing satellites that you guys have put into space. It's an honor to address you today on behalf of the International Astronautical Federation. Let me take a few minutes to talk about the IAF in what we call the new era of space exploration. About 10 years ago, there were 1,000 active satellites in orbit. Today, 10 years later, there are now more than 10,000 spacecraft actively in orbit. That's an incredible escalation in the number of spacecraft and space actors utilizing low Earth orbit, medium Earth orbit, and geostationary orbit. The largest space actor today is actually SpaceX, a commercial company with over 4,000 satellites in orbit. And the second largest is OneWeb, another commercial operator. This trend shows you that there's an amazing amount of new commercial actors in space that are utilizing space and space-based applications to make life better here on Earth. I've spent more than 30 years in the space sector, and I can tell you that this is the most exciting time. These new space actors are looking at ways to utilize capability and to show what space can actually do here to better life on planet Earth. There's been over $200 billion invested over the last decade in the space sector, and it's created a $3 trillion space economy. For example, there are over 15 billion mobile devices today on planet Earth, all embedded with satellite technology. That is, chips to receive position, navigation, and timing signals from spacecraft in orbit. Most people don't understand that their phones actually have satellite technology embedded, but in fact, it's there and they're using it every day. Today, we're seeing more and more use of space to understand what's happening here on planet Earth and make life better here on planet Earth. Climate change and sustainability are now being prioritized, and you cannot understand the impact of climate change and what's happening without using space technologies to understand what's happening in the atmosphere with ocean level rise and polar ice cap melting. We used to say that space is a big place, but no more. Space is now becoming much more crowded and congested. And that's a good thing because more people are using space-based applications every day. What we need to see now is that space actors, and these are amongst them now, space agencies and commercial operators, are using space efficiently and conducting their operations safely in orbit. We need more international norms and best practices by these space actors. And we need to work together to achieve ambitious goals, to be able to closely cooperate and utilize space effectively. The International Astronautical Federation is recognized as the largest, most diverse, and cohesive space organization in the world, with over 468 members from 75 countries, including all the leading space agencies, companies, space societies, associations, museums, and educational institutions worldwide. Our core is to foster international collaboration, connect and support the global space industry, and contribute to global space development. The IAF bridges all these actors, fostering dialogue and opening new space frontiers for cooperation. Being part of the Federation means belonging to a worldwide community that cooperates daily to promote space activities and develop new technologies, as well as promoting awareness about space governance and what it takes to operate safely in space. In my 3 years as IAF president, I've committed to looking at what I call the SIS agenda: sustainability, investment, and security in space. Sustainability simply is protecting the space environment as well as contributing from space to support sustainable development here on planet Earth. Without investment, we won't see the sector continue to grow. And so we need to understand and educate the community of investors about what it means to invest in space and the long horizons involved in space technology. And security means the opportunity and the ability to operate safely and securely in space and make sure that the assets that are in space are engaged in a way where they can work effectively with one another, and we can understand the space environment where scientists, innovations, and nations can actively engage in commerce unfettered from actors that are also using this common shared space. I've created a special task force in these 3 areas to reflect and elaborate on ways we can encourage sustainability, investment, and security throughout all activities of the Federation. We host a number of events every year, and we just held our first ever GLOC, or the Global Space Conference on Climate Change, in Oslo, Norway, which was a great success with over 600 attendees. Next year, we have a global conference on space security in May, which is scheduled for Tel Aviv in Israel, where we're going to be talking about how actors can work safely and securely in space. And following that, in 2025, we're excited about coming to New Delhi in India in May to talk about exploration in space and what role India is playing in space exploration. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the IC 2023 that will occur in Baku, Azerbaijan this October from the 2nd to the 6th, which is going to be an amazing gathering, an incredible city in the Caucasus region. So we look forward to seeing as many of you there as possible and coming to Baku to make that event a success. Let me again congratulate you guys on all hosting a wonderful conference there. I wish you all the best and wish I could have been there in person. Cheers and have a wonderful week. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Clayton Morey, the president of the International Astronautical Federation. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, the esteemed speakers in this session have collectively provided us with a profound and comprehensive overview of the evolving space industry. Their valuable insights have shed light on the global implications and advancements in the Indian context, and we are grateful for their wisdom and perspectives, which will undoubtedly serve as an inspiration as we navigate the uncharted territories of the new space era. And now we will move on to the next agenda of the day, the invited lectures. It is indeed an honor and privilege to have a very distinguished lineup of speakers amongst us who are at the forefront in their respective fields, shaping the future of technology and innovation. Firstly, we are honored to have in our midst Mr. Mario Maniwicz, the head of the International Telecommunication Union, ITU's Radio Communication Bureau, Joining us today, Mr. Manny Wick's expertise and leadership in the field of radio communication have been instrumental in advancing global connectivity and fostering collaboration amongst nations. His insights and perspectives on the evolving landscape of telecommunications and its impact on society will undoubtedly enlighten us all. Let me have the pleasure of welcoming him with a huge round of applause. If we could help, please help me welcome Mr. Mario Manny Wicks, the head of the International Telecommunication Union's Radio Communication Bureau. Sir, request you to please address us.
Yes, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. So it's a pleasure to be here and to have been invited by ISRO and the government of India. As you know, and as I told you this morning, the ITU is the specialized agency of the United Nations in ICTs. In particular, the Radio Communication Bureau, which I'm heading, has as a role allocating global spectrum and satellite orbits and developing international standards that are applied worldwide. And the whole objective of that is to improve access to ICTs globally. So the ITU is not like any other UN agency because we don't only have the 193 member states as members. We have also more than 900 other type of members which come from the industry, international regional organizations, universities, and research institutions. So the space industry members are also members of the ITU, which give us a multi-stakeholder composition for the development of standards and regulations, and this enriches the applicability of those regulations and standards because they are owned by the users of them afterwards, because they have contributed in developing them. So ITU's work encompasses various satellite services, as you can see in the left side of this slide: aeronautical services, maritime, broadcasting, radio navigation, earth exploration, meteorological and space and research services in a variety of orbits. Geostationary orbit, which was a classical one, and then the medium Earth orbit and the low Earth orbit. Over the years, we have witnessed a significant rise in the use of space services for broadband communications and Internet of Things, and the launch of satellite constellations in lower Earth orbits. All these systems have in common that they have to use the radio and the spectrum satellite orbits, the radio spectrum, sorry, and satellite orbits, which are both limited natural resources. So there is no way to increase the spectrum that we have, and what is increasing is the number of services and applications that need spectrum, that want to use spectrum. So obviously, we need effective regulation, and this becomes crucial in order to have more and more services using a limited amount of a natural resource, which is the spectrum. And the satellite orbits have the same phenomenon. So for that, we are following some principles that we see in these slides. The first two principles are enshrined in ITU's constitution. The first of them is that to ensure the efficient and rational use of resources, services should limit the use of spectrum to the minimum essential for the adequate provision of the service. Moreover, spectrum and orbital resources coordination mechanisms between different parties are put in place for that reason. Okay, so we try to allocate the minimum essential spectrum for the services to run, and then we enhance the cooperation among users in order to share the same resource. The second principle of equitable access to spectrum and orbital resources is implemented through a mechanism whereby resources are planned a priori, which ensures future resource availability for all countries. This is the planning of these resources that was the case for the geostationary orbit, and then for the non-geostationary orbit, we have other systems in place to try to ensure equitable access. It's much more challenging, of course, for non-GSO than for GSO. And then the third principle that you see there, which is space sustainability, which is one of the main topics of this meeting, is not engraved in the Constitution. This has come to the picture much later and more recently. And then, as I mentioned this morning, this was decided by the Plenipotentiary Conference of the ITU in 2022, last year, that the ITU should play a role also with this third principle to ensure that we have long-term sustainability of orbit and spectrum resources, as well as on the space sustainability. So the mechanism for the implementation of these are not yet defined, and we should do it together with other agencies and players that are working in this domain, as we discussed this morning. So all these principles that are enshrined in our Constitution are part also of the regulatory framework, the international regulatory framework, that is a treaty that is binding for all the 193 member states of the ITU, that is called the radio regulations. These radio regulations are 117 years old. Of course, today's radio regulations are not the same that we had 117 years ago, because every 4 years there is a World Radio Communication Conference, which is a treaty-making conference that updates and changes these radio regulations according to the needs. So member states, industry, academia, and research organizations, international organizations, have developed preparatory technical and regulatory studies, and the final decision on the changes to be made, on the updates to be made to the radio regulations, will be made by member states during the conference. The next conference, as I said, is this year, at the end of the year in Dubai, so you are all most welcome to come and join. International regulations provide numerous benefits. They ensure interference-free operation of space services, enable global harmonization that creates economies of scale, making devices and services more affordable, facilitate emergency communications and international roaming, and provide legal stability for investments in radio systems in outer space, while at the same time encouraging innovation in space services. So in this slide, with these four main topics, we kind of encapsulate the real advantages of having this international framework. So to have an interference-free environment is a very important issue. We all take for granted today that our mobile phone will not get cross-talks as we did with the old phones. Those of you that have my age will remember that we were talking the conversations or listening to the radio while we talked on the phone. Today, nobody thinks about that. Nobody expects to see the TV with other images going on, the image that we have. And this is thanks to these principles that we have managed to get an interference-free environment for all our radio communications. And we have to cherish that. We have to continue taking care of it and respecting it, so that this doesn't go, let's say, without the due respect by everybody. And I'm very proud to say that this has been so understood, so well understood by everybody, that these radio regulations, this treaty, has been respected even during major geopolitical problems and conflicts like the world wars. So those, even during the war, people were meeting and discussing technical issues in order to make sure that we continue to have an interference-free environment and harmonized use of these scarce resources as much as possible. Those of you that are old as I am will remember also the first mobile phones that we had, that regardless of the size and regardless of the weight, we couldn't use them outside our country or outside our sub-region because they were incompatible in other places. So now that we have harmonized the frequencies that are using, that we harmonize the standards that where the equipment is being produced, we can buy a mobile phone anywhere in the world and it will work anywhere else in the world. So we take it for granted again, but this is because of these efforts. And of course, for emergency communications, even more important. So these principles, this international regulation grants stability for the trillions of dollars that we have to invest, that people are investing in this industry, and at the same time open the door for innovation and new services, as it is the case in each WRC, as we call for short, the World Radio Communication Conference. So to finalize, this is a bit of a history of ITU in the space service regulation. So I put there some 6 milestones, if you want. We could have many more. But in 1963, you can see there that the first allocation of radio spectrum to space services were done by the ITU. In 1971, the regulatory procedures to get access to spectrum and orbital resources and proactive protection of the shielded zone of the moon for future radio astronomy observations were made. In 1977 and 1988, it was the adoption of space plans to translate the noble principle of equitable access to orbit spectrum resources into concrete deliverables for each ITU member state. So in that space plan, each member state had a slot, so everybody can have at least one slot in the geostationary orbit to use. In 1997 and 2000, it was the introduction of the regulatory procedures to allow non-GSO systems to share spectrum with GSO satellites. In 2012 and 2015, measures were taken to combat satellite spectrum warehousing so that we don't have paper satellites, as we call them. I mean, filings to the ITU to reserve spectrum, but projects that will never see the light. And in 2019, which was the last WRC, it was the allocation of more satellite spectrum for mobile applications and introduction of measures to ensure timely deployment of non-GSO constellations. So this is the history. And what lies ahead? Well, in this coming conference at the end of the year, the agenda includes topics such as suborbital vehicles, aeronautical mobile satellite service, Earth exploration and space research service, Earth stations in motion on aircraft and vessels, inter-satellite links, narrowband IoT by satellite, and procedures for frequency assignments for GSO and non-GSO systems. And the following conference will most probably include topics like space sustainability, that, as we mentioned before, lunar spectrum management, so we'll start managing spectrum on the moon, review mechanism to ensure equitable access to non-GSO satellite systems, and direct-to-phone, or should I say direct-to-device communications. So in conclusion, I extend my invitation once again for all of you to join us at the ITU for the upcoming World Radio Communication Conference in Dubai. You can register for the conference as you are all members of the ITU, and you can participate not only to help define the future of radio communications, but in particular define the future of space and space sustainability in the framework of the radio regulation. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much for that enlightening talk.
Once again, thank you very much, Mr. Maniwicks, once again. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we are extremely privileged to have Ms. Claire Joly, who's going to be joining us virtually. She's the head of the OECD Space Forum. And Ms. Joly's extensive knowledge and experience in the space industry has played a pivotal role in shaping international policies and fostering cooperation among nations. She's going to be addressing on the salient features of an exclusive report brought out by OECD in line with the theme of this 4th edition of SELM towards a new space era. Let me now request Ms. Claire Joly, the head of the OECD Space Forum, to deliver her talk, and she's joining us virtually. Ma'am.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Your Excellencies, Mr. Chairman of ISRO, heads of space agencies, directors and colleagues, I would like to thank ISRO very much for the kind invitation to share during this G20 meeting some findings from the Space Forum of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD. I bring you greetings from the Secretary General of the OECD. We have prepared a background paper for this event, and indeed I will share some of the key findings. As we all know, and as we heard throughout the past session, the space sector is currently undergoing a major transformation known as new space. This major shift started already some 20 years ago, actually, and its acceleration is due to several factors. With disruptive technologies coming finally online, CubeSats, reusable launchers, new actors with fresh investments from the internet economy, especially, as well as key policy decisions that were taken particularly by NASA for supporting new space via the development of commercial supply missions to the International Space Station. The long-term effects of new space are driving several developments that have implications for the future of space activities. On a positive note, the benefits of space technologies are better distributed than before, thanks to a more diverse population of space actors in terms of countries, operators, growing share of startups, all contributing to a growing pool of potential partners for cooperation and trade. The figure on the left-hand side of this slide shows the number of economies, countries that have operated or launched satellites in the last 5 decades. There has been a distinct growth since 2010, with capabilities also developing in lower income economies. But there are also rising concerns about the sustainability of this growth. The acceleration in space launches and in the number of satellites in orbit is taking place while there is already a large population of space debris created in the past decades, as shown on the right-hand side of this slide. The key concern, obviously, is the concentration of debris could make orbits of very high socioeconomic value inoperable over time. This is really a growing concern. But beyond environment sustainability, the recent succession of economic shocks, inflation in particular, threatens the vitality of the space innovation ecosystem. This is true for G7 countries, this is true for all G20 countries. An important contribution by new space to society is really this multiplication of entrepreneurs and innovation, but this trend is fragile and could easily be reversed. So we believe that governments need therefore targeted responses to develop policies that balance both developments in space and responsible behavior. And this is really, I would say, the job of the OECD to support this economic development here. But before acting, policymakers need a workable definition of new space so that they know which groups of actors and activities to monitor and support when needed. The term new space was really introduced again some 20 years ago, and the lines between old and new space actors has been often unclear. Today, the traditional space industry innovates to adapt to disruptions, while the most recent market entrants have become themselves often government contractors, recreating the traditional space industry model, I would say. Still, from a policymaking point of view, the term new space can be useful for identifying market entrants that overcome specific cultural, regulatory, and financial barriers to conduct space activity. The OECD definition for new space to improve measurement refers mainly to recent and small actors, many of which are inspired by the digital economy. They are highly dependent on private capital and promoters of what we call the lean production processes. And obviously, they are also initiators of innovative products, services, and business models. New space activities can be found at many different places in the space value chain. They may disrupt existing activities, including, for instance, space launch and in-orbit activities with groups or constellations of very small satellites, or develop their own digital business, building up on existing space and ground services. Many of the startups that are really active right now in the space economy are actually in the downstream services. Some are attracting private capital also to develop completely new commercial activities, space resource extraction, space tourism, on-orbit services, and so on, as we heard also from previous speakers. Against this backdrop, the OECD offers the following consideration for decision makers in governments as well as in space administrations to support sustainable space activity in the new space era. First, there's a need to develop on a national basis what we call a level playing field by making administrative and regulatory processes and requirements favorable to these new market entrants. For example, in the United Kingdom, a new sliding scale policy was introduced for in-orbit third-party liability, under which insurance requirements may be reduced or waived for really low-risk missions. Young and small innovative space actors indeed often need specific support. According to our OECD research, these actors are normally those that suffer most during economic crisis. We just saw this during the COVID-19 pandemic. Also, access to finance can be quite a challenge as they are trying to go into developing their actual services. Several governments in G20 countries have already taken steps when it comes to access to finance by creating public venture capital funds for space ventures. This does not replace private investment, but this helps actually move and upscale some of the services. Governments are also encouraged to continue supporting entrepreneurship through business incubation center, where European Space Agency BICS, for instance, are good examples. For public venture capital funds, we have examples in France, Italy, and Japan most recently. Second, more collaboration across countries will be needed to find affordable and innovative solutions to material challenges. One major challenge for the long-term growth of space activities will be definitely space traffic management. There are lessons from, again, the COVID-19 crisis that underline the unique role of international research infrastructure and cooperation to actually share data and be able to actually improve governance of a number of major items. For space, we do have examples from meteorological satellites cooperation, but also, as our colleague from the ITU mentioned, in terms of actually sharing scarce resources like orbital slots. There are indeed lessons learned that will really, I would say, promote cooperation to actually tackle this issue of space traffic management. And this brings us really to this final point in terms of ensuring long-term sustainability of space activities. We believe at the OECD that this is really one of the key items for the future of space activities. This will require concerted action at both national and international levels, as well as new thinking. At the OECD, we have been partnering with Space Administration to launch an original project on what we call the economics of space sustainability in order to complement a lot of the major discussions that are taking place at different UN levels in particular. We are collaborating with universities and research organizations from around the world to actually assess the potential cost of space debris to society to provide new evidence also on the different policy options that could actually be taken by governments to provide more sustainable space activities. This can go from taxation to new standards. We have a report that will summarize all this brand new research coming up in a few months, and we believe it will provide, again, useful evidence to actually move up the discussions at new levels. Here, this is really my final slide. You can see that the OECD has worked extensively on several of the points discussed today, and you are really welcome to consult some of these publications. We will be also producing before the end of the year the Space Economy in Figures, which is one of the top OECD downloaded publications that will provide new indicators, giving you trends on where the space economy is going. Again, I mentioned this work on the economics of space sustainability. This complements other work done in other parts of the world. Here, I would like to thank the organizers again for inviting the OECD to share some of these findings, and we are ready to cooperate with all of you to make sure that space is actually beneficial for everybody and sustainable for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that very interesting talk. Now over to.
Thank you very much, Madam Claire. And ladies and gentlemen, you would have just received this OECD report on harnessing new space for sustainable growth of the space economy, which was just circulated a while ago. With that, we are really privileged to once again thank Ms. Claire Jolly, as well as I'd also like to express my deepest gratitude to Mr. Mario Maniwix. Thank you, Ms. Claire Jolly, also for your exceptional and insightful invited talks. For both of you, your presence and expertise have left an indelible impact on all of us, enlightening our minds and expanding our horizons. And ladies and gentlemen, now we have a tea break, and tea is being organized on either side of this room, the Western Court and the wings, post which we will request you to proceed for bilateral meetings. And then I request all of you to please gather at 6:30 p.m. at the Prince of Wales lawn for the cultural program, and a very interesting cultural program, ladies and gentlemen, as well as the gala dinner. And tomorrow, day two's program starts here at Western Court at 10 a.m. sharp. So we will see you at dinner at the Prince of Wales lawn this evening at 6:30 p.m. Thank you very much once again, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.